Today's framed, like Be'emet, everybody knows, is Hilula de RaShbI, Yom Simchasei, the Simcha and the Hilula of RaShbI, and it's a Yom Tov, which was Neskaba V'chol Tfutas Yisrael. Like Be'emet is one of those days that everybody celebrates. The Gemara gives, in other words, a different explanation for like Be'emet, a Nigel explanation, because that the Paschal Talmidei Rabbi Akiva Milomus, the Talmidim Rabbi Akiva stopped to pass away. They died because Leinogu covered Zebazeh. I just saw a Sicha last night, which is worth mentioning, Amacham Bekitza Nimratz, where the Rebbe brings his classic explanation. Why did Talmidei Rabbi Akiva pass away? And he explains Leinogu covered Zebazeh, they had a deficiency in covet for one another. They were Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. And the essence of Rabbi Akiva was, V'havta lecha kamoicha zeh klal godel b'teira. So they loved each other. Because they loved each other, each one wanted that they should understand things correctly. So each one tried to teach the other the way they understood it, based on the assumption that the way I understand it is correct. And they know covered Zebazeh that maybe there's another way to look at V'havta lecha kamoicha. And as a result, the whole Aveda was a lack of respect, and therefore 24,000 Talmidim passes away. Said the Rebbe, that doesn't make sense. This is the standard explanation. Because when Nog covered Zebazeh, 24,000, and they passed away in a few weeks. So the Rebbe is Medayik in the Lashon HaGemara, Kulam Meisu Be'esei Perek. They all died at that Perek, at that moment. So the Rebbe brings a Rayas from Shas, that the number 24 has to do with Batei Din, with Dinim. He brings a story where they sent 24 wagon loads of the Talmidei Rebbe to be Ma'abed Hashana, to do something for the calendar. And they passed away, I think it's a Yerushalmi, they passed away because of Ayin Hara. So the Rebbe explains that Talmidei Rabbi Akiva should not have died because of Leinogu covered Zebazeh. But because at that point, you say Perek, says the Rebbe, they reached 24,000, that's what the Rebbe says. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim collected slowly, they reached Chav Daled Elef. In the Lashon HaGemara, it never says 24,000. It says 12,000 pairs, Yud Beis Elef Zugi, 12,000 pairs. And there's gifts that say Taka, that he only had 12,000 Talmidim. But the convention, the assumption is that he had 24,000 Talmidim. So the Rebbe says, when they reached 24,000 Talmidim, and the union of 24 has to do with dinim, with judgment, so because of Leinogu covered Zebazeh, they were vulnerable to an Ayin Hara. That's how he translates it. They didn't die from the Leinogu covered Zebazeh, but because there was, so to speak, their guard was down. The Shmira that usually exists was missing because of Leinogu covered Zebazeh, but they passed away not because of Leinogu covered Zebazeh, but Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, at that time, when they reached this critical mass, they reached this number, and there was a need to especially be careful of Ayin Hara, and because of the Leinogu covered Zebazeh, the protection wasn't. That's how the Rebbe says it in the Sikha. It's a different word, this interesting word. And I believe the Rebbe brings in the footnotes other reasons for like Be'emet as well. But be that as it may, the Gemara says, possibly they stopped to die, which is a funny thing. I mean, they all died, there was nobody left, they stopped dying. What's the Yom Tov? Doesn't make any sense. So that of course will depend on how Lag Ba'emet was. Was Lag Ba'emet the end of the dying, or was it an interruption of the dying? You see, there's different opinions when they passed away. And according to some opinions, they passed away till Shlosh Yisrael Agbola. So it was simple that on Lag Ba'emet itself, nobody died. The day before and the day after, people passed away. But not on Lag Ba'emet proper. But if Lag Ba'emet was the end of the dying, you have to say that someone was left over. You have to say. If nobody was left over, what's the Yom Tov? There was nobody left. But in any case, this is Simchasei Shel RaShbI on one level. The Simcha of Lag Ba'emet on one level. But on a deeper level, and this is of course the Shturim that we talk about, is that this is the Simcha of the Histalkus, the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. Because the Gemara says that after Rabbi Akiva lost his huge yeshiva from this plague, from this epidemic, from this Eisei Perek, Rabbi Akiva moved to Dorim, as I stated last night, he moved to the south, and he collected 5 or 7 Talmidim. After Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away, the world was destroyed, there's no Torah. You have to remember what you're talking about. You're talking about within a century of Churban Bayis Sheni. It's less than 100 years as a Churban Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva saw the Churban. And the survival of Klal Yisrael had to do with Yavne. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai met Aspasionis Vaspi and Aspasionis Keser, and he negotiated with him 2 things. One of them was, 3 things. One of them was this heal of Tzaddik, and the other 2 was Yavne v'chechameha and Beis Rebbe. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw the Churban happening, and he asked the Romans to leave Torah alone. And the Romans agreed. Teirat Megillos. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the yeshiva in Yavne, v'chachomeha, and Beis Rebbe was left alone. And Rabbi Akiva now is representing that continuity. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. There was a Holocaust. A Holocaust. The Rebbe told someone in Yechidus, more Jews were killed by Churban Bayeshem than were killed in the World War II. It's a Holocaust. But Teda was spared. Teda was left. No. The Rebbe says numbers. Yeah. I mean, the Gemara says a number which is 360 billion. Aguzme. Azay steht in the Gemara. Even if you're going to say that the Gemara is aguzme, but the Rebbe said that whatever number the 360 billion represent, it was more than 6 million Jews. The Rebbe said more than 6 million people were killed by Hashem. But Teda was spared. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Gamliel, B'shas HaChurban, Rabbi Akiva was not a Rosh Yeshiva. The Yeshiva was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was Histalkus, he was succeeded by Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananya and Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkanus. And when they passed away, their successor was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva has this huge yeshiva, and in a matter of weeks, they're gone. You understand? This is the context. That's why Rabbi Akiva is such an important person in history, because literally Teda was bottlenecked in one man. Teda, which survived Churban Abayis, was reduced to one single solitary person. The Gemara says, Kulu aliba Rabbi Akiva. All the Teda we have is Rabbi Akiva's. Of course, it came from many people before, and it was transmitted to many people after. But Rabbi Akiva was a narrow spot. Rabbi Akiva was a bottleneck. And Rabbi Akiva lost his yeshiva. So he moved to Darim, and it's explained that but it means to move to Darim. It's a place of more chesadim. And he collected 5 or 7 Talmidim Sachakol. And from these Talmidim became the Hemshech HaTeira, and one of them was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was Histalkus on Lag Ba'Omer, and this is Yom Simcha. This is the day of the Simcha of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Even though, on the one hand, we're celebrating the interruption of death by Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, when it comes to RaShbI, with a ket, we're celebrating his Histalkus. Now, every year we get together like Ba'Omer, and we do something, right? And I suppose we've learned all the sikhs, my mom repeated the same thing 50 times. I want to do something I've never done before, which is read the story of the Histalkus. Go back to the original. Let's read the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is passing away. It's a most interesting story. And in the story itself, you understand why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Histalkus is a Yom Tif, while the Histalkus of his Talmidei Rabbi Akiva is considered an Avelis. Yeah, go ahead. They state in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Masechti Yevamos. That's what the Gemara says. No. Let me clarify something. The Gemara doesn't say they died from a plague. The Gemara says they died because they had no respect for one another. I'm assuming that they died from a plague. In other words, if there had been a medical examiner in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he would have had cause of death. You understand? It wasn't that their heart stopped all in one day because there was a Bepashtus, there was a Das Tachten. You know, you have in the Tanakh, Sancherev had students. Sancherev had an army of 75,000 soldiers. They died in one night because the Navi said they're going to die. So it was a miracle. But if there would be a medical examiner, he would say they had food poisoning. It doesn't make the nest smaller that has an Achiza b'derech hateva. So it doesn't say any place in Torah that RaShbI's Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim died from a plague. I'm assuming it, but pashtus. You understand what I'm saying? That the Nes had the event had a Teva explanation. Torah is telling you the real pneumistic explanation. Now, this is the Idra. And I'll tell you a little bit what's made Idra, what the Idra means. Idra means a cheder, a room. It's it's an interesting story. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gathered together a group of Talmidim in an Idra, in a room, and he taught them the deepest secrets of the Torah. The Idra, the original Idra that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gathered together Talmidim and he taught them Torah is in Zohar and Pashas Nosei. This is Zohar and Pashas Hazinu. The original Idra was in Zohar and Pashas Nosei. He gathered together 10 Talmidim, as I state, and it says in the Mefarshim on the Zohar that these 10 Talmidim represented the Esses Spheres. I mean, to be sure, it was only 9. He was the 10th. Together with him was Armenian, 10 Yidden. And he was Megala say this. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the deepest in Yonim and Kabbalah are in the Idris. The most difficult parts of the Zohar, the most mystical aspects of the Zohar are the Idris. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gathered together 9 Talmidim plus himself, and he taught them the big Seder Sateiris. It's called Idra Rabbah, the larger Idra. What happened? As the result of this learning Torah and the Idra, 3 of Talmidei RaShbI were Histalkus b'Kalesa Nefesh. Plus the Sabbath, the Mesu b'Idra. The Torah that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed affected the 3 of them. Pashat the Neshama went l'mayla. This is the day Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is passing, and he gathers together the remaining Talmidim. Now they're not 10 anymore; they're 7. And the express purpose, and the word express means explicit, the direct reason for why RaShb'i regathers this Talmidim to reconvene the Idra is for his own Histalkus. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wants to go l'mayla with Torah. That's the pshat in the Maisa Bepashtas. He's going to reconvene the Idra, he's going to get together his Talmidim, and be Magalah Seidas HaTorah, and that the purpose of this Hisgalus, of Seidas HaTorah, is the Histalkus of Shimon Bar Yochai. It's an unbelievable insight. A person says, everybody's life has to end, I want to go l'mayla with a fire of Torah. So let's now read the Zayar inside. Okay? Tana. It says in the Braise, B'hahu yoyme, that Rabbi Shimon ba'al istalaka. On the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai ba'al istalaka. Now the word ba could either mean needed to, or wished to be mistalik. Be mistalik min alma from the world. And as you know, the term that's more conventionally used is nifter. When a person dies, they say he was nifter. What's make nifter? He went away. Histalkus is a term that's used by tzaddikim. Histalkus doesn't mean to go away. Histalkus means to exist on a different plane. The Rebbe has in the Siches that the word Histalkus means a gilui bebechinas areimelos, a revelation that's on a more exalted plane. V'hava mesadem ilui. And RaShb'i is planning for Histalkus, so he's organizing his thoughts. Iskanashu chavraya lebei Rab Shimon. So the chaverim of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai gathered in his home. V'havo kamei, and there was in front of him Rabbi Eliezer Brei, his son Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba was the writer of the Zayar. And it says in the Mefarshim that Rabbi Abba was Rav in the Gemara. And he lived 400 years. Bechlal, in Tanya, in Shas, in the Gemara you have a lot of people's name was a Rabbi. Every person whose name was a Rabbi, his name was actually Rabbi Abba. They just abbreviated it from Rav Abba to Rabbi. Rabbi Bar Nachmani and Rabbi Bar Choma and so forth. The name was Rabbi Abba. And Rav, the opponent, the counterpart of Shmuel, the greatest of the Gedolim of Bavel, was named Rabbi Abba, and he apparently was in Eretz Yisrael. RaShb'i was in northern Yisrael in Golil, and he was there as a young man, and later then he moved to Bavel, and he opened up a yeshiva in Surah and so forth. And this is the same Rav, and he was a Talmud of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Ush'ar Chavraya and the rest of the Chaverim, but then it also says V'hava Malya Beis. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's home was full of people. Continues the Zayar and it says Zakif Inui Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon raises up his eyes. V'chama de Ismail Beis, and he sees his house is full of people, and Bacha Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon cried. Why did he cry? He sees so many people in his house. Was fainted. Why are you crying? Because so many people in the house. So there's something very interesting. The Yamar, and he said, Bezimna Acha, on a different occasion, Kad Avina Bebeimiri, when I was ill, Havara Pinchas Ben Yor Kamoi, my son-in-law, Pinchas Ben Yor was a chasna, Edim, by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And it says in the Gemara that in the beginning, Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor was on a higher madrega than his father-in-law. And after Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came out of the cave, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was in a higher madrega than Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor. The Gemara says that originally Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor would say something, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would ask him 12 kashas. Then after, the mighty Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would say something, and Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor would ask him 24 kashas. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tchut gave hecha fazayin edim. Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor was chasnoi, the son-in-law of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that when I was ill in the past, my son-in-law, Rabbi Pinchas Ben Yor, was here. Till I clarified my place, what it means, whatever it wants. But maybe it means I decided to stay here as opposed to go there. They waited for me. They waited for me. There was a derech eretz. V'katavne, and when I returned, in other words, when I decided to remain here, Ischer osha mikamoi, a fire surrounded me, or came forward from me and surrounded me. Umei almen layit pasek. It never went away. There was always a fire around the RaShb'i. And as a result, says the Zayar, it's 6 lines in, V'lehave o'ol banash ele b'shusa. No person could enter my domain without my permission. There was a fire around me, says RaShb'i. And the consequence was that nobody could come next to me unless I gave them the shus. V'hashta chamina, says RaShb'i. Today I see that this is the actual Histalkus of RaShb'i, and I see the itpasek. The fire's gone. The fire that's been surrounding me for a very long time is lifted. V'hatmalya beisa. And I've been invaded. I don't have a balabatashkeit in my own home. I've been invaded. I see that the light is gone, and people have come in who don't belong in my home, who have not come to Rishus, and therefore Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was crying. Now, what's the pnimius of this little comment? Obviously, you understand that, I don't know. But I'm going to offer you an interpretation. The interpretation is very, very simple. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was what you would call classically a neshama d'atzilis, elakus. Shimon Bar Yochai was in a Neshama d'Atzilus. Said in other words, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was in a madrege that we call a merkava. Right? He was a chariot of Meibishter. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Guf Kodesh was a vehicle for Lakus. In Chassidus, in Tanya, it says that the Malachim are from Yetzirah. The Neshamas of Tzadikim are from Briyah. The Neshamas of Tzadikim Gdoilim, that's the expression, of the greatest Tzadikim, they're from Atzilus. And what's the difference between these three worlds? The world of Yetzirah is a person, is a creation, a malach, has a relationship with the Eibishter, but it's an instinctive relationship, it's his nature. El Mabriya is a level where you have a relationship with the Eibishter that's based on one's intelligence, on one's seichel. And El Matzilus is a relationship with the Yid and the Eibishter that's an even from Merkava, a chariot for the Eibishter. This is the madrega of the Ovis. Ovis Heinim have a chariot for the Eibishter. The Havana Shabbat, the Pshat is that those Yidden who are Neshamas of Atzilus, especially RaShbI, who amongst Neshamas of Atzilus was so extraordinary and so outstanding, he was a keli for Ein Sof. Ein Sof to him was not a concept. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't talk about Ein Sof like we do, as experts. He experienced Alakus bepashtus. In the world of Shimon Bar Yochai was a gili of Alakus, fire. And the marshal of fire and light is an allegory, is an allusion to Oid Ein Sof, the infinite light of the Eibishter. Where did this light come from? This light came from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Beklal, and from the Torah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of those Jews who all he did was learn Torah. Shimon Bar Yochai didn't even do mitzvahs. Shimon Bar Yochai didn't daven, because Torah was his life, and a person who learns Torah in the madrega of Shimon Bar Yochai, which is a very special level, it's an elite level, it's an exclusive level. Other people do work for him. RaShbI is given Torah, his life was Torah. And from Torah, RaShbI is given fire, lichtikai. And there was always this light. Now, everybody around RaShbI did not necessarily see the light. I suppose the greatest of Talmidei RaShbI, Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, Rabbi Abba, and so forth, they saw the Eid, but most people didn't. But somehow there was a sense that we don't belong here. Without seeing the Alakus, they knew we don't belong here. So they didn't trespass. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was an important person, and people knew I'm a gate in Tarayin under Shus. You don't go into RaShbI without permission. It doesn't matter that the door is open. It doesn't matter that there are no guards. It doesn't matter that everybody is nice. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, the fire, the Eir Aleki, protected me. And I'll have a nice little story which I've shared with you in the past that illustrates this just somewhat. I love this story. That there was a Michaelis Lotcher, when he was a boy, the Talmud from Baal Shem Tov, when he was a boy, was a prodigy. And he lived in Brod. In Brod, at that time, there was a huge klois, like a koilo, with 300 go'oinim. And the head, the teacher in the klois of Brod, was a Chaim of Tzanz. This is not the Divrei Chaim, the Tzanz Rebbe. This was somebody much earlier. It was a Gebaldiker Goen. He was actually, in fact, a Misnagit to the Baal Shem Tov. And he had a huge yeshiva of go'oinim. 300 geniuses sat and learned Torah Yom of Alayla, and he was the head of the klois. So he comes to the father of Reb Michael Zlotcher, his name was Yitzchak Drabitcher, and he says to him, I hear you have a son, prodigy. Faval shiksam nishtin klois. Why don't you send him to join the Chabura? He'll have Dibur Chavedim and Pilpul HaTalmidim. So he comes home, and he says to his young boy, his 7-year-old, Faval geist nishtin klois. Why don't you go to the klois? So he tells him, I never thought of it. I'm going to go to the klois. So this 7-year-old now goes to learn with all the goyim in the klois for a week. And after a week, he says to his father that he has no intentions of going back anymore. So his father asks his son, Was der gefällt nicht sein Teure? His Teure is deficient. He's not enough of a scholar for you. He doesn't say nice enough shiurim. So he answers as follows. He says, Tate, sein Teire is wie dein Teire. His Teire is the same as yours. In other words, when he speaks to the Teire, he's as great a scholar as you are. But as zech nicht as es soll gehen a fire for sein moil. When he speaks, I don't see fire. When you speak, I see fire. So I want to be makabel from you. I want to learn from you. I don't want to learn. Chochmas HaTeire was the same. But the Eireliki, the fire, the pnimius, the godliness was lacking. RaShbI was a yid whose whole mitzvah was pnimius. And the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that the Reiv Limude was benigel the Torah. You know that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that most of Shimon Bar Yochai's time was spent learning nigla, not nistik. Alter Rebbe writes that the Zohar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai could have learned in Beis Gimel Chadash. The whole Zohar is 2-3 months by RaShbI. The guy says he spent 13 years in a Meire. There was this the Sheish Meis Siddim Mishnah that we be a Meim. There was a lot more Mishnah, a lot more Halacha Psuk, a lot more Braisis than we have at that time. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Ikya Limude was a nigla, but the Torah Torah of RaShb'i created a fire. And RaShb'i sees that the fire's gone. And then the proof for it is that his house has been invaded. He does not have balabayas in his own home. To explain this, to explain this further, it's also very simple. We learned in Chumash Rashi about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu says on the day of his Histalkus, I have no more power. And it says that Rashi in Histalkus elevators, he lost lights. Moshe Rabbeinu says, today I lost my koyach, I can't lead. And Rashi says, Ein shiltem be'imamavis, on the day that a person passes away, they have no balabatishkeit. Ein shiltem be'imamavis. Why not? Why not? The answer is very plain. The way the Eibishter made the life of a person, and this is especially true by tzaddikim, and especially true by what the Alter Rebbe calls tzaddikim gdoilim, the shamas of Atzilis. Their life is kol yoyma v'yoyma ovid avidete. Every day they do work, a job that's associated with that particular day. And by serving Hashem on that day, they don't just use the time becomes a new cheftza v'lukus. They created a new godly entity, which is the day itself. And each day they fill with an avodah pratis, with a specific service associated with that day. And in the world of RaShb'i, he had only one job, Torah, a chutz for Torah, kein zach nigahat. So RaShb'i taught Torah, and for the Torah give him fire. But today, the day of the Histalkus is not a yom prati. It's not another day that you fill with alakus, because the day that a person passes away, even if they're going to pass away 1 minute before the shkia, that 24-hour period is not a yom prati. It's not a specific day in their life, but rather it's a yom klali. It's an all-encompassing day. An all-encompassing day means to say, think about it in these terms. We all understand what Shabbos means. We've talked about it so many times. Shabbos is an aliyah. A whole week you work, Shabbos everything rises up. And that's why we sing Yeshes Chayil, the neshama is coming home. The day of a Histalkus is an ascent, is a culmination of a life, just like Shabbos is a culmination of a week. Your whole life rises up, right? Kol avedos asher aved, kol meshech yemei chayev eila lamayla. Every year on a yahrzeit, the new mitzvahs, the many mitzvahs of that person have an aliyah. They go lamayla. A whole year they're doing activities and kol yema v'yema medavidet. On the day of a yahrzeit, day of a Histalkus, it all rises up. So it's not about work, it's about culmination, it's about ascent. And understand that when Tchias HaMesim happens, living people are going to celebrate their yahrzeit, because the milas are not going to go away, the chesrenis are going to go away, but the milah, the day of a person's yahrzeit, it's more important than a birthday, because it's the aliyah, it's the ascent of a year of work, or a lifetime of work, and so forth. So this is the day of Histalkus. So this is no longer a yom prati, it's no longer a specific day that has to do with a particular aveda. So the fire that is associated with the Torah of a particular day, one day has one fire, another day has a different fire, the third day has a third fire, because one day has one Torah, another day has a different Torah, and the third day has a third Torah, that fire is gone. So RaShb'i sees, like exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ein shiltem v'yein mamavis, Histalkus mimenu elevators. It says in Chumash Rashi in Parshas Vayelech, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was going away from the world. So in relationship to the world, there was no longer a fire. So RaShb'i cries, I'm out of control. I'm not a balabas in my own home. And for RaShb'i, that's a very big thing. But then the Zohar continues and says as follows: Rabbi Yossi, while they were sitting, or until they sat, Rabbi Shimon opened up his eyes, and he saw whatever he saw. We have no idea what it was that Rabbi Shimon saw, but it was obviously some kind of a revelation. And then it says, so the fire came back. A fire surrounded his home. Now, I'm interpreting this, but it's not that the fire came back, it was a whole new fire. Because until that moment, the fire that Rabbi Shimon had was a fire, and again, understand what a fire means. Fire means everything self, godliness. We learn Torah, we understand Torah. Understanding Torah is called acharayim, the back of the Torah. The intellect of Torah is ocher. The panim of Torah is godliness. If a person learns Torah Lishma, a person learns Torah the way they're supposed to, the Achar, the Seichel HaTorah is connected upon him to the Pnimis of Torah, which is Eid Eliki. But by you and by me, that's infinite munah. We believe that there's Eid Eliki because we don't see it. By Tzadikim G'deilim, they learn Torah, you see the fire. The Seichel HaTorah, the Acharayim of Torah is automatically linked to the Panim, to the Pnimis HaTorah, so you learn differently. You don't make mistakes. When you see godliness, you don't make mistakes on the intellectual level. You understand? It's a whole other world. This was Rabbi Shimon Yochai's Metzias. Torah Oir. Not Torah Seichel, Torah Oir. He saw the light of Torah. The Torah went away, and now it comes back. This is a new Torah, it's a new fire. This fire is not a fire of a particular inyan in Torah, or a particular day in the life of RaShb'i. This is the fire of Rabbi Shimon's whole life. Rabbi Shimon's having an aliyah. So the specific Oir associated with a particular Torah connected to a particular a particular day has lifted. And what he has now is an Eir Kol, a much higher light. And the consequence, of course, is going to be that he's going to reveal much deeper Torah, because this Torah is not an aspect of RaShb'i, it's the very essence of RaShb'i. This is a fire that has to do with the very essence of Shem Bayachoy. So the Torah that's going to come from this fire is a much higher fire. So what happens? By osmosis, people leave the house. They just know they got to leave. And again, we're going to go with the assumption that not everybody saw the Eir Eliki. But when the light returned, this is a different light, people knew it's time to move. We don't belong here. Let's read it inside. The house was filled with light. Everybody walked out. And the only ones who remained with RaShb'i were Rabbi Yossi Paltiel and Rabbi Abba. Only Rabbi Yossi, his son, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Abba, the scribe of the Zeir, or Shar Chavraya Yasu Avraya. The rest of the Chavraya Kadisha sat outside. In other words, maybe they did see the Eir Eliki, but they knew we don't belong here. They walked out. He didn't make any announcements, didn't ask anybody to leave. In other words, Rabbi Shimon became again a balabos. But this is a different kind of balabatishkeit. This is not a balabatishkeit in this world, this is a balabatishkeit of going away. Rabbi Shimon says to his son, Puk Chazi, go see. Go outside and see. Rabbi Yitzchak is here. I'm responsible for him. Tell him to organize himself. He should come sit with me. His chelik is zaka, his meritus. Come Rabbi Shimon. Then Rabbi Shimon sat up. I'm assuming that doesn't mean stand up. I think it means sat up. V'Yosef, and he was sitting. Come Rabbi Shimon v'Yosef. He raised himself and he sat up. V'Chayech, and he was laughing. V'Chadi, and he was happy. And Omar, he said, where are my chaverim? Now the simcha by RaShb'i, this is the teva of tzaddikim, right? Rabbi Shimon Baruch cried. He was sad because there was no alakus. But when the alakus comes back, the alakus automatically triggers simcha, because in alakus there's simcha. The way Chassidus looks at it, depression is a symptom of this world, of Helen Vehested. In Alakus, everything is in a ma'amad matzav of Gilui, and Gilui is Simcha. And of course, you know that there's two Simchas. There's ein Shchin Resheda element of Simcha. There's the Simcha that a Jew has as a hechsher, as a achorah, that there should be a Gilui Eliki. In other words, you want to have Ruach HaKodesh, you have to have Simcha. And then there is a Simcha, which is the symptom, which is the expression of the Gilui Eliki. So the Shimon Yochai is light, it's brent of fire, it's lichtig. Is Rabbi Shimon Freilich. He's in an uplifted spirit. Omar, and he says, Oni Nechavrai, where the Chavedim? Everybody ran out. He wants to bring some of them back. But now it's Birshus. Come Rabbi Zayda v'oil, come Rabbi Lozer. His son got up, v'oil, and he brought them into the room. Yosvu, Kamei, and they sat in front of him. Zog the Zayar, Zokif, Yodei, Rabbi Shimon, Umatz, Litzais. Rabbi Shimon raises up his hands and he davened. And again, I'm going to assume that this Rabbi Shimon didn't daven every day. Mitamol do davened. Maybe it was Birchas HaTeira, I don't know. But he raises his hands like a Merkava Falakus, like the Koyanim Duchan, they raised their hands. Like the Kruvim, the raised wings, were a place where the Shechina rested. Yeshev HaKruvim. He raises his hands and he davens. V'abachodin, he was B'simcha Rabba. V'amar, and he said, Inun Chavraye Dishtakacho B'Idra. Those Chavedim who were with us in the Idra that we had last time, Yizdam and Hacha, I want them and only them now. Everybody else should leave. It's a cheder. It's a cheder. It's a place where the Shimon Yochai gathered, and he was Magal, the deepest Seder Satera, and 3 of them were Nistalik, Kaleis HaNefesh and the Idra. It's Geblitten Zivn. There was 10 originally, and the Chav writes that it would correspond to the 10 Svidas. And now there's only going to be 7 people left, because 3 had already passed away. The Shimon Yochai is reconvening it. Now, they passed away from the Gilead Eliki of Torah. Rabbi Shimon Yochai is reconvening this Idr for one reason. For his Histalkus. In other words, he's telling him up front the purpose of this Gilui is that my neshama shebe'ela b'sa'ara hashamayma with the Eid Eliki of this Seder Satera. It's pretty powerful to be invited to such an event. You understand? So, he invites back in the remaining Chavedim of the Idr. There's Sachakol 7, and he's one of them. Nav Kukulu. So everybody else left. Vishtaru, and they remained, and he lists their names. Rabbi Lazar, it says in footnote Gimel, is Chachma. Rabbi Abba, it says in footnote Daled, is Bina. And Rabbi Yehuda, it says in footnote Hey, is Chesed. Rabbi Yossi, it says in footnote Vav, was Malchus. And Rabbi Chia, it says in footnote Zayin, was Yesed. and Adahachi, and as people are going and coming, oh, Rabbi Yitzchak, the Rabbi Yitzchak who RaShb'i invited first also appears, and Rabbi Yitzchak is Gvura. So you're missing a few of the Sfiras. Netzach and Hoid are missing, because these were the three Saved and Meisu Idra Rabbe. And now Rab Shimon is reconvening an Idra to say Torah, to be Magala, Lakus, which is going to be Maila, Nishmasei Lamaila. Amalei Rab Shimon, so Rab Shimon says to Rabbi Yitzchak, Kama Yos Chokach, how fortunate are you, how special, how benefited, how advantageous is your portion. Kama Chidu, boy, how much joy am I going to give you on this day? Now Rab Shimon is planning to pass away, and he's telling them that he's giving them Simcha. Because you're talking about Tzadikim Gedolim, Neshamas Atzilas. And Rav Shimon Chayes Megala Lakus. No, Gila Lakus is Simcha. It's an underside Simcha. Yosef Rabbi Abba Boser Kasv. So Rabbi Abba sat behind Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. But Rabbi Lozer Kamei, and Rabbi Lozer sat in front of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Omer Rav Shimon goes up to Azay. Ha Hashta, right now, is Shaita de Reusa Hu. It's a time, it's an Eis Ratzin, it's an auspicious time. V'ana be'ina l'meil. And I wish to ascend l'mayla. Belay kisufa, without shame, la'alma the author to the other world. He said, I want to go up without shame. Now, I don't know what without shame means, but I'll tell you what I think it means. It means, the Gemara says, that there's many different ways to die. I suppose that's a very blunt way to put it. Many different methods of death. And the Gemara says that some are more painful, some are less painful. And the Gemara says there's over 900 dirachim. It's less than 1,000, 900 and change. I forgot the exact number. The most painful way to die is called kadachas. Please don't ask me what it is. And the least painful way to die is nishikin, from a kiss. And the Gemara actually describes the pain. It's like it's a finger in the eye and the finger on the cheek. You poke someone in the eye, it hurts, yeah? Poke someone on the cheek, it doesn't hurt. The Gemara says it's not painful. Misas nishikin is the most... Why? For an obvious reason. Most paper, when a person dies, the goof dies. The machine breaks down. No, if the machine breaks down, if the candle runs out of fuel, so the soul ascends. Nishikin has nothing to do with the guf. Nishikin is that the neshama is risen up. So the guf remains without life. This is why it says by Neget Rabbeinu HaKadosh that B'yem Shemeis Rebbe Batla HaKahuna. And Reb Chaim HaKohen says, if I would have been Rebbe's Levaya, I would have been metama myself. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Guf Kadosh was not metama. Koyanim went to Rabbeinu HaKadosh Levaya, which is the source why we say by the Rebbe there's no tumah. Achatcha field, the Rebbe made a tefach, a wall, 10 tefachim, to protect Koyanim around the oil. But the Rebbe said that stam azeh azehidus yiseidim edafasnit, because the guf kadosh of a tzaddik is not metamer. By the Rebbeim, the Koyanim went. The pashtus. It's based on the Gemara about Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Because most people die, the guf dies. And when the guf dies, this kisufa means tumah. The guf becomes tumah. But if the neshama leaves, mitzad the guf, it's still alive. Mitzad the guf, it's still alive. Then from nefesh, it remains in the guf, like it says in the Geras HaKedesh. So there's no tumah. So RaShb'i says, I have to go l'mayla, but I want to go l'mayla below kisufa. It should be a death that has to do with neshama, and not a death that has to do with guf. And this is why he collected the chavedim of the Idra. When er sagt weiter, V'ha milin kadishin, and the following are holy words, legalian ad hashta, I never revealed them till now. And as I told you earlier, I am I'm assuming that these new giluyim are coming from the new Eish. Remember, the Eish went away and the Eish came back. The first Eish was an Eish Prati, which had to do with the Avodah Pratis of Shem Yochai. This is the Eish of Klolos Chayev. This is the fire, the very essence of Shem Yochai's whole life. So the Torah, which comes from this Eish, in other words, the Seicha that comes from this Holokus, the Acharayim that comes from this Ponim, is Gor Ananda Madrega. It's a much higher level of Torah. I've never revealed such Torah before. Be'ino legalo kamei Shchinta, I want to reveal it in front of the Shechina. And I'm thinking out loud, Shechina is Malchus of Atzilas. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, I want to teach the Shechina something. Because Erik is in Hecher. Shimon Yochai was a Neshama B'guf, was a physical man, lived on this physical planet, and he was in a Maimed U'Matzev higher than Shechina. So he's going to reveal something to the Shechina. Okay? So Rabbi Shimon Yochai was not your local rabbi, you understand? The Layemen that it shouldn't be said, the Habegreyusa Salak Nami that my departure of this world was a Greyusa. From a deficiency, from a chasarin. The same idea again, it's not about Misas Aguf, it's about Aliyas HaNeshama VaNefesh. So I'm going to teach Malchus, where the Neshamas come from and where the Neshamas go, that he should understand that when I return Lamaila, it's not a Greyase, it's Ayin for Histalkus, Ayin for Misa Petira. Va'ad kan Tmir and Have boy, and until now I hid these ideas in my heart, To use them as a vehicle to ascend. Now, could you imagine you'd be in a cheder like this, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells you, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the Rebbe. It's not, I gathered you today to say Torah, you'd run out of the room at the life of Forgotten. I'm going to help you? So Rashi, the Jewish people said, no way. Aaron stood up to the Malach HaMavis himself, and now he's gone? Until the Eibusha showed them the Musa they were carrying him. But these were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Talmidim. This is what needed to be done, and this is what they did. This is how I want to set you up. Rab Abba Yichtiv. Rab Abba will write. But Rabbi Elazar B'ri Yili, my son Elazar is going to learn. And learn means to speak. The rest of you are going to whisper in your heart. In other words, you're going to think. Now, my instinct is, and again, you have to understand, I'm saying Pshat and Azayar. We don't understand that we don't understand Zayar. But this is, no one here is passing halachas based on this class. I think the word is, I'm going to teach, and Rabbi Elazar is going to be my Meturgaman, he's going to repeat. And Meturgaman doesn't just mean to say over the words in a different language, it means to bring it from a higher madrega to a lower madrega. Just like in the Zman HaShas. Someone said Mikra, someone said Mikra, Torah. Another person was Metargum it into Aramis. The difference between Mikra and Targum, Mikra is Elokus, Mikra is Pnei HaTorah, is Panim, is Shmeisav Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Targum is Seichel, it's a lower madrega. So Rabbi Shimon says, I'm going to speak, and Rabbi is going to repeat, and Rabbi is going to write. Sagt weiter. Come Rabbi Abba got up from behind Rabbi Shimon, and he positioned himself in a different way. And brother sat before him. Now, what does this mean before him? He was already sitting in front of his father, so this is my assumption, and believe me, I could be wrong, I know I'm wrong, but Rabbi Abba faces not Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Shimon is going to speak to Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Elazar is going to repeat it. So Rabbi Abba is listening in, not to what Rabbi Shimon is saying, but to Rabbi Elazar's interpretation. So what happened was, and Rabbi Elazar himself was sitting in front of Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says to his son, Kumbari, get up, my son. Somebody else is already sitting in that seat. Who's that somebody else? It's like the Chamina ma the Chamina. He saw what he saw. Rabbi Shimon says, somebody else says, who's that seat? So Rabbi Elazar stands, come Rabbi Elazar, steht Rabbi Shimon wrapped himself and he sat and he was going to speak Torah. And the Torah goes on for about 20 pages, 18 pages. 9.5 blot. It's very, very long. Idra Zuta. In one day, Rabbi Shimon was Megala made in the Kesedus. And we're going to skip that part. I'll just tell you one verse that everybody knows. It's very, very famous because it's brought all the Maimonim, that amongst the 10 pages, Rabbi Shimon 10 pages for somebody else's is an encyclopedia of Sfarim. The famous words that Rabbi Shimon said, Ani ledeidi v'alai teshukasai. I think about this pasuk, it's a pasuk in Shirashirim. But who pays attention? Ani ledeidi, I am for God, v'alai teshukasai, and He longs for me. The Eibishter lusts after me. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, a pasuk, the Eibishter alai teshukasai, the Eibishter darf mir haben kvayach. And then he said, b'chat ketira is katarna. With one kesha, with one knot, I can tie myself to Atzmos Ein Sof, b'yachidna, b'lihitna, b'yezdavkes. I can become one with Him. I can become full with a fire with Nebishtin, and I have a dveikus with Alakus. These are 3 different madregas. There's a lot of discussions in Chassidus, how you interpret these different madregas. But the bottom line is, Rabbi Shimon Yochai says about himself, that I'm reaching now madregas I never reached in my whole life. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu says, Moshe Rabbeinu had only 49 gates. Moshe Rabbeinu had only 49 gates. And it says in the pasuk, V'yal Moshe ha-nevoi, Moshe Rabbeinu ascended to the mountain of Nevoi, says Chases Svarim Nun Boy, that on the day he passed away, when he went up to Han Nevoi, he reached the 50th gate of Bina, the 50th level of understanding. So RaShbI says the same thing about himself. On the day of his Histalkus, he reaches the highest madrega of Asagir. And then there's the whole. Now turn the page, and the end of the page tells the end of the story. So Shimon Yochai darshan, and he said Torah, and there was fire. So Gebrenta fire, and in the middle of speaking, he was speaking an Inyan, and he says the words Kisham Tziva Hashem Masabecha Chaim Ad Elam. I would think it's 13 lines from the top, maybe 14. There's 2 vertical lines in your text. Yes, you see those 2 vertical lines. Omar Rab Abba says Rab Abba Leisayim Butzino Kadisha L'mei Mechayim. The holy candle did not finish saying the word Chayim. Adu Ishtachachol Milah. He went silent. He was in the middle of talking, and he said Chayim. He stopped. Now I want to say 2 things to you. First of all, In the whole Zayar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is called Botzina Kadisha. That's his nickname. The Heilige Licht. RaShbI is called the Holy Candle. In the whole Zayar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is called the Holy Candle. Throughout the Zayar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is called the Heilige Licht. That's why it's called the Holy Candle. Why is it called the Holy Candle? I don't know. Nobody told me, right? We all know the Pasuk says, Ki neir havai nishmas adam. That every neshama is compared to a candle. And it also says, Ki neir mitzvah v'teir, that mitzvahs are compared to candle. Beruba deruba, v'derech klal, for the most part, when you compare a neshama to a candle, you compare the neshama to the keli, to the cup, or to the fuel, or to the wick. You follow? You compare the candle to the vessel. The light, the fire, comes from the Meibish. It's a higher inyan. By RaShbI, it says beferish that he was the fire. He's talking about Tzina Kaddish, he's the holy candle, but not like most neshamas Yisrael. Most neshamas Yisrael come from Kelim. It says in the Geser Kedesh Simen Chof that way neshamas come from Alakus. It's Yotzu v'Nifredu. They're not even a madreg of Iya v'Gamei Echad. They're separated with Vegas not themselves Alakus. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's neshama came from Oyer. It's a whole different kind of, a whole different machine. His Metzias Chatchil is Eish. Chatchil is Oyer Leki, RaShbI. And perhaps this is why he's called Botzina Kaddish. So before he finishes saying Chayim, he went silent. He was still. Zoktev Anokasavne. And I'm writing. So I wanted to keep writing. I don't hear a word. But I was afraid to raise my head. Said Gebrenta fire. There was a lot of light. The Baba saw the Edeliki of the Torah of RaShbI b'Yem Histalkus I pushed it, couldn't look at it. And suddenly I trembled. Baba understood. They all knew why they gathered. They gathered in the Idra to repeat the performance. Just like in the Idra Rabbah, there was plus a Sabbath, the Nifti Gavon in the Idra. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gathered them that he should be Eila L'mayla B'lei Kisufa, right? Or B'lei Greyese. And now he stopped speaking. So they understand that this is a story. That's the Maisa. The Noch said, Shemayna Kala the Kari V'Amar. I heard a voice that said, Eirech Yom V'Shnei Chayim V'Shalom Yisifalach. It doesn't say the whole pasuk. My assumption is that this means a long arichas yamim, but not physical arichas yamim ruchniim, which have no end at all. Shemayna kala achar, I heard a different voice that said, Chaim shalom cha nasatalei eirach yam melam vad. He asked for life, and they gave him eternal life. Now life is physical, eternal life is spiritual. Chaim shalom cha, and he gave him eirach yamim, life forever. And I'm mentioning that shal, I circled the word shal. Shal means to request. But shal also means to borrow. Because there are certain tzaddikim who should never have been born. And their whole metzias in this world is they were pushed borrowed. Like Shmuel on Novi, it says, Chana said about her son Shmuel, Mehavaya she'iltiv, which means literally, I requested him from the Eibishter. But it's also translated, Mehavaya she'iltiv, I borrowed him. And Alisa Lamorem Shavisa Shevi. And the Rebbe brings in the Siches that there are certain Neshamas Yisrael that they were stolen from the Eibishter. And Shevi is a Rosh Tevis. Shimon ben Yechoy, or Yitzchak ben Shloimer, that's the Arizal, or Yisrael ben Sara, that's the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rebbe says, Yosef Yitzchak ben Shalom de Beresh ten Sara, what the Friedige Rebbe. There's certain Neshamas, Alisa Lamar, Shavisa Shevi, they have no Shachas of Elam Hazeh, and they were borrowed, and now they're being returned. This is the Histalkus of Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, Einachanami. Okay, Zokter weiter. Kalahu Yema, that entire day, le'ifsik Osha min Beisa. The fire did not depart from the home. Nobody could approach Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You couldn't touch him. They couldn't. The Neheira v'Asha, the light and the fire, was all around them. And as I explained to you before, this is not fire, it's a Brenta fire. It's Pashat Elikus Eid Ein Sof. It was a Gilei Eid Elaki. And those who was Eichas saw it. And those who didn't see it just knew they don't belong. So Gebrenta fire, so given lichtig. What did I say? And please don't ask me questions. Everything will become clear. Kala Yemen the filma al ara v'gavina. That day we laid on the ground and we cried. They were misabel. They were mourning. Basa the ozil osha, and eventually the fire lifted. And chamina lebutzina kadisha kedesh hakadosh. So we saw the holy candle, and now we call them kedesh hakadosh, the holy of holies. The istalik min alma. There was a yim from Histalkus. Is atif, he was still wrapped, as he was wrapped when he said Torah. Shachav al Yemini was laying on his right side, and Va'an Poichayich, the Podim of Yoleich, his face was radiant, was shining. Understand that by tzaddikim, the guf doesn't die. The neshama has a histalkus, but the guf has chayis, like it says in the Ger Sakedish, that nefesh remains in the guf. So his son Rabbi Elazar stands up, and he takes the hand of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, his father, and he kisses it. And I licked the earth under his feet. It's a funny description. So I was thinking, and again, all of this is interpretation, that each one was misyaches to the madrega of RaShb'i for which they were makabel. Rabbi Shimon kissed the hands of RaShb'i because he was makabel from the midas, from chagas of RaShb'i. And Rabbi Abba, who was the next in line, was makabel poshet from beneath the feet of RaShb'i. That's the ein hareich between Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Shimon, and the ein hareich between Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Abba. And you think about the other Talmidim of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. In other words, each one related to the part of Gufi HaKadosh, which B'pnimius, in mystical terms, they were makabel from that madrege. Bo chavraya lemifke, the chavraya wanted to cry, v'la yochilu lemalala, he couldn't speak. And then it says, sha'oru chavraya b'pchia, I don't know how to read these words exactly, but eventually they figured out how to cry. It's the only way I can explain it to you. But Rabbi Elazar Berei, nafal klasim, his son Elazar fell 3 times. Not only he fell, but pashas, it means he fell to the ground, pashas he collapsed. But the pnimius anyonim, he fell means he fell from his madreges. You know, by tzaddikim. Tzaddikim are very smart people. But tzaddikim are very inspired people. And the inspirations are not their own. So inspirations are matana from the Meibush. And sadness by a tzaddik, avelis. There's a maimed from the Rebbe RaShb, Samachtes. When the Rebbe RaShb lost his brother Azar, he said a maimed, Lahav and Inyan avelis. And he explains what mourning means. And he says that avelis means you lose your meichim. You lose the gilui. In other words, you lose, you're as smart as you were, you're as pious as you were, but you're not inspired. Because the reward for the avodah of Abal Madrega is a Gilead Elaki. But the kli to that Gilead Elaki, the point of meeting between the inspiration that comes from the Meibush and the avodah of the tzaddik is the simcha. And when there's avelus, the opposite of simcha, you lose those enlightenments, so you fall. And Rabbi Elazar found 3 different levels of Yerida Rabbi Elazar had as a result of the Histalkus of his father. He couldn't open his mouth. Lebasar, eventually, Pasach v'yomer, he opened up his mouth and he said, Abba, Abba. Now who is Abba, Abba? It could either mean Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, he's talking to his father, or it could mean that Rabbi Abba Taka, our Rabbi Abba described, and he says, Klas Hava, we were 3. And Chad is Chazara, 1 was returned. And now he says a line of pure, unadulterated Kabbalah. I'll read it and I'll translate. I'm not even sure the translation is correct, but I'm not even going to attempt to interpret this. He says like this. Hashta now, Tonit Chayusa. Chayusa means animals will move. Tzipron, Tossin, the birds are going to fly. And Mishtakin b'nikvan the Yamaraba. And they're going to be immersed in the nikvan, in the holes or the feminine of the great ocean. V'chavrayu kulu shas yedam, and all of the society, all the chavedim are going to drink blood. What does this mean? Don't know. Come Rabchia. So Rabchia gets up. Al Ragoya on his feet, v'amar, and he says, Adahashta until this minute, Butzina Kadisha Mistakal Alon. The holy candle, our Rebbe was thinking about us. Hashta Lahu Adon. At this point he's no longer thinking about us. He's focusing on his own honor, his own light, his own madrigas, his own aliyah. Like the Alter Rebbe said to his Talmidim, to his Chassidim, Chap darein nitzter, weil später wird die Klamke zu martieren an Neden ich kennen treffen. The Alter Rebbe said to his Chassidim, now, I'm here with you, but when I go away, you'll never find me. So Chap darein now. So the Rebbe RaShb said in Teir Shalom, and this is a raya that the Alter Rebbe was on a higher madrege than Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, Eineni yedei be'ez derech malichin ois. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says he doesn't know if he's going here or there. Now the Rebbe says, you'll never find me. It's such a madrege. So it's a tzaddik, he's a stalik from this world, on a hot zugvel, kei shaychas, finished. The Indian from the Yazev Tzei Marisei, that we always learn, and the Rebbe's v'chsidim are, upon him that's not true by all the Rebbeim. It's true by certain Rebbeim, especially by the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe, who had they didn't have their own life b'chlal. Their whole metzius was am. Other tzaddikim, they tackle with Makarav people, they taught Torah, they created a derech, but they also had an Aveda Pratis. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Mesilas Nefesh and the Rebbe's Mesilas Nefesh there was no metzius except am. So b'meila there's no das is Yakare. But RaShb'i, Rabchia says about RaShb'i, that at Chuf Gehem Hechet, he was already ascended higher, and that's all there is to it. Come Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Abba, so Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Abba stood up. The Talulei, and they moved him betikra the sikla. It's some kind of a vessel that allowed them to carry him. Man chomo erbuvia dechavaya. Who could see the erbuvia, the confusion of the chaverim? In other words, it was a terrible state of confusion as they were carrying RaShb'i. I'm not sure how to read these words exactly. This is how I'm reading it, but I'm certainly capable of, maybe it should be read differently. That slikolei bepuria, the whole house was filled with a smell, a smell of Gan Eden, which came from the puria, from the bed of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Nobody touched him. Nobody touched Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai except his son Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Abba. Other communities came and they wanted to bury Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai with them. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was in Miron, and they wanted to move him outside of Miron. So Bnei Merun yitzafchen b'katirin, the people of Miron were screaming b'katirin. Katirin means, I don't know what katirin means, knots, ropes. The chashiva, because they were thinking they wouldn't bury him taki in Miron, but they did. Bosa the nafik puria, the bed was carried out of the house. Havasolak ba'avira, the bed was floating in the air. And again, an assumption and an interpretation. The Gemara says ha'aron nesei esdesav. The nesei ha'aron, the people who carried the holy ark, they faced it. Kulei ponim. They didn't walk with their back to the aron. The shulchan, the menei the mizbeches, the two in the front faced forward, and the two in the back faced forward. And they walked so they could see where they're going. The people who carried the aron HaKadosh all faced the aron, because the aron had the luchas abris, and the luchas abris is kulei ponim. So in other words, if you were walking, carrying the aron in the front, you walk backwards. Now that's quite a trip to walk backwards, carrying the holiest thing in the world. So the Chazal say, aron not, they didn't have to carry it. They held it, and the aron lifted them and transported them wherever they needed to go. So RaShb'i's aron, Guf Kache, was Histalkus The Idra Zuta, and there's a story with now from the Rebbe. The Rebbe was Histalkus Motzei Shabbos Kedesh Pashas Shmois. In Kfar Piena, in a village called Piena. In Piena there was no Jew, let alone a cemetery, a Beis HaChayim, a Yiddish cemetery. And they moved the Alter Rebbe to Hadich, which was the nearest community where there was a Beis HaChayim and a Kehillah and so forth. So who took the Alter Rebbe? So the Mittel Rebbe was not there. The Mittel Rebbe went to Kremenchuk to buy a house to live in, because the Alter Rebbe burnt his house down in Liadi, Kiyadua. And the three people who took the Alter Rebbe was the Tzemach Tzedek, who was 22, his brother-in-law, Reb Nocham, the Mittel Rebbe's son, who was 15, and the Tzemach Tzedek's oldest son, our Rebbe's Zayda Baruch Shalom, who was 8. These were the three people. But you're talking about, Butzina Kadisha. These are not normal neshamas. And it was freezing. It was frigid cold. So they stopped in a kretschma onwarmen zach. The Alter Rebbe was on a casket in an aron of shliten. You know what shliten means? On a sled. With a horse. They didn't have wheels. And two went inside and one stayed outside. So the goyim thinking to themselves, since when does someone stand and watch a bar minan? You leave a person in a casket, you go inside and you warm up, the freeze is not going to bother him. So they assumed that there was an oitzer. There was a treasure in the box and they were planning to kill them, and there was a nest that they became very drunk and they fell asleep and so forth. But the other thing is that while one of them was standing guard by the Malton Rebbe's aron, the aron raised itself. It hovered. It floated in the air. When the Gezen, a chazar, a pig, was trying to roost underneath the aron, so the Guf Kachif Malton Rebbe, but can't vertragen the Tumme, hat sich gehäuben. It raised itself. So here you have the Pshim by Yochai's aron hat sich gehäuben. V'asha have a loyat kamei, and there was a fire all around. And remember, this is a fire ruchni, not a fire gashmi. Eida leki. Shamu kala, they heard a voice that said, and here, people, is the source of the simcha. Before we saw how they mourned and they cried, and the Elazar B'Shimon fell 3 madreges and so forth. Shamu kala, they heard a voice that said, Ulu v'asu. Rise up and come, v'iskanchu, and gather, lehilula de Rab Shimon. To the simcha of Rab Shimon. Hilula doesn't mean stamazeh simcha, it means a simchas chasen, the joy of a wedding. Because Rab Shimon by Yochai's Histalkus is a simcha of vestach kale. This is mean kale, kaleis hanefesh. Megeituf, a yid becomes one with neighbor. This is the simcha of Rab Shimon by Yochai. A chasen means chois darge, to go down. And kale is lashon kiloyin, vestach from 3 psukim. The 3 psukim was makes halmal and chasidus. Nicht zeggen wir golsa nafshi. V'gam kol nafshi lechatz is avaye. Right, noch steht, I'm not going to remember the 3 psukim. One is L'chatas Havaya and one is L'Hashem. This 3 psukim about Kaleis HaNefesh, 3 different madreges. Kaleis means to ascend, to go up, to a moment in Nebishtin. And for RaShb'i, this is the greatest simcha, the Hilul of the RaShb'i. And this is the simcha of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Histalkus. Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not pass away b'kisufa, and did not pass away b'greisa, right? In other words, going back to the very beginning of the class, Talmidei Rabbi Akiva died, it's an avelus. Because their dying was kisufa and greisa. The guf died. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was Histalak on the same day. But his Histalkus is simcha because his Histalkus is not connected to kisufa and greisa. It's not tumah, it's not the guf, it's the ascent of the neshama. Do you understand? Yavei shalom v'yanuchu al mishkavesim. Shalom should come and they should rest on their mishkav, whatever these words mean. Kadol lama'ata, they took him into a cave. In those days, everybody was buried in caves. In other words, they didn't bury people in the ground. They dug down into the ground and they created a room. And the room was called the ma'ara. And then into the wall of this room, they would excavate like shelves. And that's where people were laid. And there's all kinds of halachas about Midas, different days and so forth. So as they took him into the ma'ara, shamu kol b'ma'ata, they heard a voice in this cave that said, Zeho ish marish ha'aretz, this man trembled the earth, margiz mimalchus. Now margiz mimalchus, or margiz mamloches, he angered kingdoms. My interpretation, my understanding is that he started up with dinim. He fought against people being judged. He angered the dinim, the judgments. Kama patane b'rekia. How many people are potter from judgment today because of you? In other words, the presence of Hashem Bar Yochai. The Gemara says, Rashi says in the Chumash, that the whole day of RaShb'i la yira keshes. There was no rainbow. Hashem Bar Yochai said, Yechayel lifted kol ha'ilam kulam and adin. I could spare the whole world from judgment. And the Yem Histalkus, the voice from heaven says, how many people are getting away easy because this is Histalkus RaShb'i. And then the word deno, I don't know how you read it before or after. RaShb'i, Demore, Mishtabech, V'chayim, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's chus is that the Eibishter praises himself with him every single day. Zalka, Chulke le'elo tata. His chus is great, le'elo, but latata. And of course, latata means that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells us galost. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't just come into this world and leave this world and think bikari. The whole Pnimius HaTeira, Seidas HaTeira, the neshama, the eraisa is from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And of course, he got it from Rabbi Akiva. Kulu aliba Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva is also connected to Lag B'Meh. How many hidden secrets are being guarded for him that he's going to get in the El Mabah? Alei itmar, regarding RaShb'i, it's written, V'ata lech lekeit, you go towards the end. V'tanuach, and rest. V'tamid legeroch, and get up to your chelik, what you have in El Mabah, lekeit yamin, at the end of time. And it says in Sfarim that keit yamin means the end of kav yamin, the end of kav chesed. Because chesed is stuff goes off mugbul. And keit yamin, the end after the end of yamin, Yifaran and Agili was tak a bleak vul. No medida b'agbola. This is the story of Shimon Bar Yochai's Histalkus. Okay, a good Mishabes. A Mishabes Shayches mit RaShb'i. No, I don't think so. The reason we make fires, the pashtus, is because fire makes people happy. It's a teva b'nei yodam. It brings out, the fire itself creates simcha. That's why in simcha is based on also. There was these huge torches, fire. Somebody told me recently something very interesting. There's 3 things that you could watch and never get bored of. A sea, an ocean, a fire, and somebody else working. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a cynical aspect, but it's true. Fire, as destructive a power as fire is, it's awesome. It's you watch a fire. Fires are usually, big fires usually don't necessarily come along with good consequences, but there's something awesome about it. It goes to our very core, Is there a minute to have colored eggs with it? I don't know. But the Rebbe apparently did it. Colored eggs, I'm like Beimer, yeah. The Rebbe used to cook eggs with the onions, the skin of an onion to make brown eggs. That's what I heard, the Rebbe used to eat it.